I'm Wayne Carey, and this is The Truth Hurts.
Well, we're back again for another episode of The Truth Hurts, a bonus episode on the toughest 10 players that you've seen in your time in football, Duck. Now, that began in 1989, so we're going from then up until the present day. I'm interested how you're judging this because there's a lot of different ways you can judge your toughest players.
Yeah, for me, there's certain criteria because there's a lot of players that I've seen and played against that are intimidating. So they're the ones that are handing the punishment out to others, and they're the reasons why the toughest players that I've picked, they're generally standing in front of those guys or being hit by the guys that I mentioned. You know, you obviously talk about guys like Tony Lockett, one of the most intimidating players I think, you know, the game has seen, well, that I've seen. And, you know, so many players that play around him and had to go back into the hole in front of him certainly knew that he was there. So he's intimidating, and obviously kept his eye on the ball, and he's tough, but not in the manner, because he was the one dishing it out, not necessarily taking it. And Garry Ablett Senior.
So he was hard, wasn't he? He could hit you, couldn't he, Garry?
Oh, well, Garry, you know, concussion's a big thing in football. I think Garry gave out more concussions than just about any other key forward. And McPlugger gave out a few too. But those two were extremely intimidating. I think of John Worsfold, who was, you know, he was uncompromising. He was tough and hard, and you always knew where he was, or you always wanted to know where he was, because he had a great ability of, you know, picking you off or timing, you know, a bump at the right time. And I rate him very highly, but, you know, not in the category of my 10 that I'll come up with. Clearly, Dermy was super tough for a number of reasons. He dished it out, Dermy, but he also copped it. And he had presence, just like the other guys I mentioned. He had intimidation, but just because I saw more the end of his career, so he was probably more in the 80s. Mark Harvey was tough. So I've got plenty of players. You know, I think of Gavin Wanganeen, how tough he was, you know, for his body size. Mark Rasciuto that I played with at the Adelaide Crows. But as you come out, none of these players are in my top 10. So Aaron Hamill, I don't know whether you saw a lot of Aaron Hamill, but he was a player that I thought was incredibly tough. Always kept his eyes on it. Was really hard. A couple of other players that I played with, Anthony Stevens was, you know, he was as hard as a cat's head, as they say. He just attacked the footy. He was just about as tough as anyone, but didn't quite make the top 10.
There's a lot of names, isn't there? Because we've had a good discussion about this, and there's 40, 50 players that you got to whittle down to.
Greg Williams, super tough. Like, you know, head over it, tagged every week, you know, had taggers, you know, Denham and these guys just, you know, but he would dish a bit out, but he also copped a fair bit. And one other guy that I played with for a short amount of time, but against, and just put himself, I thought a lot of times he just had dumb courage. And there is such thing as dumb courage. And Lee Colbert, who's an absolute ripper, he had some, you know, at times he went back into packs. And John O'Brien had a little bit of that later. Like he put himself in positions where he wasn't going to impact the footy and ended up getting, you know, a couple of serious knocks. But Colby, you know,
he lost his teeth one day, didn't he, going back with the flight?
Yeah, and was never going to get anywhere near the footy. He basically just ran into a pack for the sake of running into a pack. So, you know, there's so many names that, you know, then you had the great Essendon teams of the 90s, and they had guys like, you know, Dimmer Hardwick, Wallace, Barnard,
Western in 2000,
Solomon.
That back line I thought was a hard back line.
Oh, there was a bit of fakeness in it.
There
There was Dimmer wasn't tough. Like he kept his eye on what I mean by tough, not intimidating.
Yeah, okay.
And I think, you know, Big Woolley tried to be intimidating. I didn't find him intimidating, but he might have intimidated others. And Dimmer Hardwick probably intimidated a couple of smaller forwards as well.
Dean Solomon
and
Mark
Barnard,
Johnson.
Solomon, yeah, and they were, and you know what, they were hard. They all kept their eyes on the footy. There's no doubt about that, and they were hard. But I didn't find the Bomber boys all that intimidating. And then you had the two Scott boys. They thought they were tough, and no, they not well. Toughness and intimidation are two different things. And like I said, Plugger and Ablett, they had genuine toughness, but also intimidation. And like I assume the Scott boys did intimidate some players.
There was, in my life growing up, I mean, I probably saw less of the guys that you saw in the early 90s. The first one that I actually saw, who was a one-time AFL, VFL, AFL player, played footy in Devonport, where I grew up, was Wayne Ayrton. He had the long hair. He was a wild man, the weed. So I wonder if you ever crossed paths with him.
He probably scared. He was scared a few of the weed. I do remember getting reported against the Crows. I don't know who or what I did, but I remember the runner coming out and saying to the weed, "Knock his head off," saying, "Knock my head off." And I might have even said, and this is the runner saying this to the weed, actually kick it off, is what he said. So I don't know whether weed did kung fu or what he did, but so I remember that message specifically coming out to the weed to do that. So he would have intimidated a couple just because of, the wild man look. And, people like Zanotti. And I tell you who was intimidating and you always knew that he was there, Ross Lyon.
Yeah, he's got that about him, Ross, doesn't he? And just even in his manner, you feel like he's got that ruthless streak in him.
There was certain, believe it or not, more so than the players that played centre-half back or full-back for mine, there are a lot of those half-back flankers that, you just always, wanted to Mickey Mansfield had a little bit of it. Yeah. Mickey, you sort of always knew they would try to Chrissy Johnson, another one that, when he was just in the back pocket, just had a timing, knew how to hit. Player that I played with, Byron Pickett. Now Byron,
his bumps were
but his bumps. But the guys that I'm naming are the guys that have their head over the footy, and they're the likes of Byron are going up, and that's why my 10 are guys that never took their eyes off it and just put their bodies in harm's way week in, week out, irrespective of whether it was a Brereton, a Lockett, an Ablett, a Byron Pickett, whether they were coming the other way or not. They went there and went there consistently without it looked like without fear. But I think we all at sometimes poop our pants. But the difference between the ones that continually go there, they can still execute under those thoughts, even knowing that they're about to be hurt.
Well, before we go on to your 10, I do want to speak about that in terms of what it does. I mean, people who play footy even at a local level will know this feeling when you're backing back and you know that there's something coming from behind. I wonder for you, because so often you're backing back into packs, you're going back with the flight. It's instinctive for you though in that moment, isn't it?
It is, and like I said, I think the running back with the flight is an interesting one, because if you're running back but you've sort of run through the footy, that's obviously you're putting yourself in harm's way more. And we saw, I remember one particular mark Jonathan Brown took, and there's also we all know the Nick Rewalt mark where he ran back and got flipped over, which I thought made it look more spectacular. But that was just unbelievably courageous. John O'Brien did it regularly, but yeah, well, and I think the thing is, you know that you're going to get hurt, but you still go back under those thoughts. And I've asked a couple of the people in my top 10. I've spoken about how they, I guess, controlled that fear to never once. In my time, these players that I've mentioned, they were just consistently tough, and just kept their eyes on it.
Were there ever times where you thought a team was coming after you? And when you think about your own safety, is it more in retrospect that you think about, geez, because you're talking about dumb courage and what situations you put yourself in. Anytime a team's come after you and any time after the fact you thought, oh, geez, that was, I'm pretty close to the line there.
Come after. The only time I remember a team deliberately coming out to try to intimidate myself, and I guess being the captain of North Melbourne, then I guess they thought, you know what, well, if we can, get Duck a little bit on edge or get him off his game, then, that filters through the team. And it was Essendon, and it was those guys that I mentioned before, obviously Wallace, Barnard and Solomon and these guys. And so there was that one particular game where it was as deliberate as anything, and they just all came to me at the start of the game, and there were bumps, and Solomon got reported for kneeing me in the quad. So that was on early.
Mm. Speaking of Essendon, one bloke who I had written down, he was a bit earlier than these guys, but one I'd seen highlights of, and I bumped into him one day at a pub just above the MCG. It was after going to the tennis. I'd had a few drinks, so naturally at that stage you got your Dutch courage, you go up and have a chat to him. It was Terry Danaher.
He was tough.
Lovely guy.
Tough.
And we'd been talking for about 5 minutes, and he brought it up unprompted. We started talking about the 1990 grand final, and he laid out Gavin Brown. He didn't mind having to go, did he?
No, but he dished a bit out. But when he went back to the Wagga League, he played for the Wagga Tigers. I saw him get hit one day, shirt front, Byron Pickett style. So this is TD being hit, and everyone just thought it was like, I think it was Robbie Ellis. It was from North Wagga that actually delivered it, and you just thought he will not get up. He can't get up, and he just dusted himself off and said, "Good hit, young fella," and then just jogged off and ran about 20K. So you're right, he was, and I mentioned Mark Harvey as well. He put himself, into situations that not a lot of players do as well. So I'd mention him, but do you want to start at
let's go number 10.
Number 10,
yeah.
So this bloke who won. I think he won 4 B&Fs at a club that was successful, didn't get the highest reward. But Garry Hocking, Buddha. He was genuine. He was tough, hard. The only thing that diminished his toughness is when he slipped down that thing with it took the shot. No, he was hard, and another one that for a midfielder. And he used to give you a little bit of lip as well. I remember in one of the finals we played against Geelong, he came up to me and said, I heard you're out last weekend. You're going to run out of puff. And, he didn't mind, trying to put you off your game. And every little moment he might just run past and give you a little rib tickler. I always admired Buddha Hocking. And, to do that and, against and have a group of superstars. But he shone in a team that had, the likes of Couch and Bairstow and obviously Ablett Senior and others. So
hard to believe they didn't get a flag in all of those grand.
I know, because they were a super team and he was one of the shining lights in that team. So put her at number 10.
Righto. So number 9, we've already gone through a good, 20 or 30 names, and those were guys who were not in your top 10. So really interested now who you've got at number 9.
So much for respect for this guy, and I think the whole competition had a respect for this guy. In another club that's unlucky and should have won a premiership because of this guy. I think he won a Norm Smith in the drawn grand final. Lenny Hayes, just. How much admiration as an observer, and then how much admiration, like the competition, so his peers, and within the 4 walls of the St Kilda Footy Club, he's just a legend and goes down in folklore. And I remember Glenn Archer cleaned him up in his first game, and another one of those ones where you think, is he going to get? And he just bounced up, got up, dusted himself off, and on with the rest of the game. So 2 midfielders, definitely.
And a mix already of you've got one from the 90s and one from the more 2000s, 2000s. Yep. So I'm interested about your mix because footy's very different now to what it was in the 90s and the 80s and when you were playing the mid-90s, obviously mainly, but maybe more situations that you could get hurt back then than now.
Yeah, correct. So I think when if you keep your eyes on the footy or you bend over the footy now, you you pretty much know that you're not going to be hurt. And if you are, then the guy's going to get weak. So it doesn't happen as much. Now, do you still have collisions and it's still courageous? You know, the backing back into a pack when you don't know what's behind you, that's one of the more courageous. But the next guy is a current day player and
your only current day player, is that right? Is that your
Yes, he is. He is the only one playing still.
Yeah, so it's a big rap.
Yeah. Paddy Dangerfield. And some people might be, well, they won't be surprised that he's in my top 10 tougher, but he's attack and the way he goes after the ball on the ground, in the air. We know what he did on the weekend, played through injury. And I know some people, think that, I remember that Hawthorn game where he came off and everyone thought he had, half a leg and half an arm.
Came back on, kicked five.
Came back on and kicked five. There's theatre in some of the stuff that Paddy's, but he's relentless when he's on in and around the footy, and to one contest to the next, to the next, to the next. So I've always admired it, and similar attack on the footy to some of the guys that I have closer to the top of my list. So
how interesting for Paddy, and it's kind of funny in a way because you have been thinking about this for some time and you'd settled on your top 10, and then Paddy might have been even more surprising to some people before that moment against Port Adelaide. He comes out, he gets hit, he has a broken rib, a punctured lung or a deflated lung or whatever it was, and he he's off to hospital after the game, but he played the game out. So although there is some theatre with some of those moments, that is tough because that's pain, isn't it? I mean, he probably got some sort of,
the most famous one is, and I failed to mention him actually, but the Big Dipper, standing in front of Garry Ablett in the 89 grand final, playing through that pain. Dipper dished out a few, he had a bit of, he would have been intimidating in his prime, the Big Dipper, on a wing just prowling out there, but he dished out a fair bit, but that was courageous. So just like Paddy Dangerfield. The next one is...
So number 7 we're up to now.
Number 7.
Yep. Is that right? It should be right. Yep. Number 7.
So John O'Brien is
7.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unbelievably courageous. Obviously, running back with the flight, stood under the footy, just tough hard. He all of these guys, if you were going into battle, you would want to be behind every single one of these guys. You'd want all of these guys around you. And Big John O'Brien would be certainly one of those.
So the only thing where people may have some surprise with Jonathan Brown is that he's not higher than number 7. So how much did you toy with having him higher in this list that you've got?
Well, when you get the rest of the list, Ayrton, you'll know that it's a tough list. I mean, all the guys that you heard the guys I've left out, and by the way, this will I assume there'll be a lot of people that don't agree with a lot of my choices here because there are so many more, and other players have seen more of players, but this is who I've seen and think. So John O'Brien definitely deserves to be in the top 10. Maybe a little bit higher in some people, but he should be happy he's there.
Well, it should be a good top 6 then.
James Hird, underrated toughness. He always had his eyes on the footy, Hirdy, and I admired the way he attacked the ball. Could obviously play anywhere. I think the way he kept his eye on the ball all the time. I can't ever remember him taking his eyes off it when he's gone into packs or backing back into packs or running back with a flight or whatever it may be, and also the courage. a lot of these guys too could grab a game by the scruff of the neck too, or do something heroic to get their team over the line. And when I think of Hurdy, I think he can.
He would inject himself into he'd go from half forward, he'd put himself on the ball. Or he also had one of the most horrific injuries, didn't he? When he I think ran into the knee of Mark McVeigh and had the plates in his face.
Yeah, well, I think between John O'Brien and Hurdy, they've got that covered. I mean, Brownie's, some of his injuries, towards the end were, car crash sort of stuff. So that tells you how courageous they are. So Hurdy, guy that played a fair bit against and had so much admiration for, and played for the Pies, and I know all Pies fans will agree with this, Gavin Brown.
Yeah, okay. So I didn't see as much of Gavin Brown in my football viewing because, I'm obviously a fair bit younger than you. You're an old man. But
he was talk about respect. Played tall, could play on ball, half back, played centre half back on me a couple of times, played at full forward. But his courage was, huge. I think it's the Bob Rose most courageous award for the AFL Players Association, and he's won it. He won it numerous times. So yeah, he was a superstar. Gavin Brown doesn't get the accolades that probably others get. I think we forget very quickly just how good he was.
So Gavin Brown, number 5. So you got Hocking 10, Lenny Hayes 9, Patrick Dangerfield 8, Jonathan Brown 7, James Surd 6, Gavin Brown 5. So now we're getting into your real toughest of the tough.
Yep. Well, 3-time premiership captain, Michael Voss. He was, like the others that I've mentioned, I just can't remember him, taking his eyes. He dished a bit out too. That hit on Richardson, Alan Richardson on the wing, and you wouldn't believe it. Sitting right on the boundary in that vision is none other than the king, not me, Wally Lewis.
Oh, Wally's there.
Wally Lewis was just
he would have loved it. Wally
sitting right there when that bump, Vossi put that bump on.
Because he was he was doing Friday night footy or something for Channel 7.
He was doing the boundary. I'm not sure what the king was doing there, but that was brutal. But that's dishing it out. But he was on the receiving end. He just had presence too for a midfielder. Could grab a game by the scruff, win a game. When you have so much admiration for him, and when you go through these guys, by the way, they've all been what? They've all been leaders, most of these guys, if you haven't noticed, Anton. So Michael Voss, I don't think anyone will disagree with that.
Interestingly, and I just after you spoke about the AFL PA's most courageous, I just thought I'd get up and have a look at the names and the list. Michael Voss only won it once. He won it in 2001. But that's because some of the guys you've already mentioned feature heavily, and some of the guys I assume you're about to mention. Just Gavin Brown, I'm looking at here, one in 91, 92. Gavin Wanganeen, who's not in your top 10, he got it in 1993. I won't mention a few of the others who are potentially coming up. Voss in 2001. But some names quite a few times. Brownie was 07, 08, 2011. So
3 times.
3-time.
Voted by his peers.
Yes.
Yeah, most courageous player in the competition. There you go. So Michael Voss. And at number 3, a guy that's just recently retired and the longest serving captain in the history of the game, none other than the great Joel Selwood. And, I don't know why, but he's got his detractors because people say that he, rolled his shoulder and got all these free kicks. Don't worry about that. This bloke never shirked an issue. When they put up the statue of him outside Cardinia Park, I just want him to have a bandage around his head because he spent more time getting patched up.
They always have a bit of claret, wouldn't he, Joel?
Than just about any other player in the comp. And, to play the longevity, so there's toughness, and all of these guys, by the way, played, a lot of footy. So there's an element of toughness even about that to get yourself up, and and he's just so much admiration for him. The way he holds himself for not a big man in terms of physique. He had presence, and you could see the sidewalk taller when Joel Selwood led them onto the ground, knowing that he was prepared to do anything for the team. And no wonder that Geelong have been such a great club for a long time. And
Absolutely.
I think based on the back of, his leadership and
what effect that might have had on them this year, potentially being without him.
Yeah. So he always had a bit of a man crush on Joel. So he comes in at number 3.
So now we're into the top 2 of your toughest players you've seen in your time in football. Who have we got at number 2?
Yeah, and I drove past his farm on the weekend in Wagga Wagga, none other than the great Paul Kelly. He was so Joel's, and a lot of these guys obviously similar, clearly similar attributes. The main one, never shirked an issue. Tony Lockett. All the other Sydney players that I've spoken to over the years have all said that the one player they admire more than any other at that footy club is it automatically goes to the top of the list, and it's always Paul Kelly.
He just this ferocity about his play, didn't he?
Well, he had real speed. Like, he could go from 0 to 100 very quickly, and so with that speed, just hit the footy and. Hit the footy when, there was a steam train coming the other way. And that's the thing about all of these players. Like they've been in that many situations, all of them, where they know that a steam train and a plane and a truck are all coming at them in different directions, and they've just got one focus. And that's why these guys are in here, and some of them, the intimidating, these guys knew the consequences, and they followed through with the act. And Paul Kelly comfortably sits in at number 2.
So we've counted down from 10 to 2. A little drum roll for your number 1. It's probably no surprise, no North Melbourne players, perhaps up until now.
Yeah, well, I played with this guy, so I got to see it every week, and others got to know it every week. And you only have to go to Tony Lockett in the 96 grand final, and this bloke, well, none other than Glenn Archer. I've never seen his attack on the footy, on the ground, in the air, in particular going back, not with the flight, but backing back into holes where these forwards were coming out, and more than happy to absolutely knock you into next week. He just never, ever shirked an issue. And I remember Dennis Pagan gave us a talk one day, and he talked about courage. He said, you know what, boys, there's 3 types of courage. There's Dutch courage, and that's when you're affected by a particular substance. And so, a lot of people can be tough in that situation. And we've seen plenty of people get tougher after a couple of beers, haven't we?
Absolutely. No, see it every weekend.
I've got a couple of mates back in the day that got a lot tougher after. So he used to say, so there's Dutch courage. And he said there's expected courage. And that's the peer group pressure. So, you're expected to do it. So you do it. You do it because of that peer group. And that's not a bad type of courage. But I guess at times I guess if you haven't got those peers around you, would you still follow through with the act? And then he said there's another type, resolved courage. And that's knowing the consequences but still following through with the act. And he said, what type of courage do you boys want? And I remember we all sat there, and I think I might have said to a teammate, well, you got plenty of that, the Dutch one. But there was one bloke in the room that I think typified that more than anyone, the resolve courage that is. And
So tell me a little bit about him as a player. I mean, we've seen the highlights, but Glenn, he was not a overly tall guy.
No.
You wouldn't. He wasn't hugely, fast or anything like that.
He was powerful. He was
powerful.
Quick. Yeah, he was quick. He was quick off the mark.
But I guess when you look at his attributes, he without his courage, he's not. He can not be the player he was at all. That's what made that was his defining feature, I guess, is what.
Yeah. 100% it was. Like he didn't get a stack of the footy. He wasn't a. I don't think he won a best and fairest. He came. I think he might have come runner up or third in one of the best and fairest. So always so consistent. First pick, like I said. If you're going to go into battle, he'd be the first one you'd want to go in with. So. I used to often say early in his career, because he was a forward, he could play forward as well. People forget how good a mark. He was a really good mark for his size, and obviously courageous mark for his size. But just like Dangerfield, the way Arch hunted the ball in and around traffic, with complete disregard to his to his own body. He was as tough as they come. And I used to often say to reporters when he wasn't getting the accolades that I thought he deserved, I used to say to you, is anyone sitting up taking notice of this bloke? He's just relentless. And I don't know how many times he won
so he holds the record, Glenn Archer, for the AFLPA's most courageous. So he has won it 6 times. Paul Kelly, who you had in second, was with 5. So Archer's got the most. Dominated that award when he was playing. I'm interested in you've played through injury. Arch would have put himself in a situation to be injured. He saw danger with broken ribs. I just wondered if you got any stories of times where he shouldn't have been playing and he's just.
There would have been stacks of times where he's carried injuries into games. Just like I've said previously, there's plenty of players that do that. But he just consistently, like I said, all of those 10, and you could juggle that order around, or like some of the guys I mentioned before, you could bring in, and you might take 1 or 2 out. It's an opinion, but those guys just all had eyes for the ball. Their eyes never deviated from the ball. That was their primary focus, not worried about anything else. So that's what typifies that group. And toughness isn't about whacking someone. The toughest thing in footy is about keeping your eye on it, and they all did that. And Arch, I got to see it more regularly than anyone else. So Arch typified that. More than most.
I'm going to stitch up to finish the program, to finish on a lighter note. When we first discussed this as a potential topic, your 10 toughest players in your time in footy, you showed me a clip from YouTube. You got out, you said, have a look at this clip. And I thought you were going to show me a clip of Arch or show me a clip of Vossi or Hurd or something like that. It was you running through Dean Rice.
No, that wasn't tough. That was you. Good way to end this. Yeah, no, I actually put that up on my Twitter during the week because of all these players getting rubbed out for, and I someone had sent it to me. David King had actually sent it to me. So I just sort of wonder what I'd get. What you would get for that.
For those who haven't seen it,
for that bump.
You marked the football.
I marked the football at the same time.
Yeah.
By the way, very courageous from Dean Rice.
I thought you were going to say from yourself.
No, very courageous from Dean Rice. He was a courageous player, Dean Rice. But that was courage. I assume he knew that I was coming up to the footy. So to put himself in that situation, that's what we're talking about, and that's what all of these guys did. So there you go. There's the top 10. So I'm ready for the feedback about it. I'd like a lot of feedback about it, and throw up some names if the players I've left out, and whether someone in my top 10 you think's lucky to be there. But I don't think anyone can argue that those players, not one of those players, shouldn't be in the conversation. And some should, in other people's opinion, some should be higher, some should be maybe a bit lower. But there you go. That's my 10.
Fascinating insight, Duck, as always. For those who do want to give some feedback, you can do it on Twitter, you can do it on Instagram, you can do it on Spotify or YouTube. The Truth Hurts, Wayne Carey. Any comments that we like, we'll play on next week's episode. We'll debrief. Your top three, as it was Joel Selwood at 3, Paul Kelly 2, Glenn Archer at 1. See you next week, Duck.
Cheers.